The gas station was quiet, just another late evening under the fluorescent lights. Jade Williams stepped out of her car, stretching her arms after a long drive. She wasn't in uniform, just wearing a simple black tank top and jeans, looking like any other traveler stopping for gas. But Jade wasn't just anybody. She was a high-ranking Navy SEAL, trained for combat, survival, and strategy. Though tonight, she had no idea she was about to need every skill she had. As she reached for the gas pump, flashing blue and red lights filled the station. A squad of officers, dressed in full tactical gear, swarmed the lot. At first, Jade assumed they were after someone else. She had no reason to worry, until she saw one of them staring directly at her. "Step away from the vehicle," a deputy barked, his hand resting on his holster. Jade frowned, confused. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "Hands where we can see them," another officer snapped, stepping closer. The other customers at the station froze, watching as more officers surrounded Jade, their weapons drawn. Something wasn't right. Jade had been in intense situations before, but this wasn't a standard stop. The officers weren't just cautious. They were looking at her like they had already made up their minds. "You match the description of a wanted fugitive," the lead officer said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. Jade's heart pounded, but she kept her face neutral. A setup. That much was clear. But why? And more importantly, who was behind it? As cold metal locked around her wrists, she scanned the faces of the officers. Some looked hesitant, as if they knew something was off. Others looked too eager. She had seen men like them before, ones who abused power because they thought no one could stop them. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. As they shoved her toward the squad car, Jade took a slow, steady breath. They thought she was just another helpless woman caught in the system. They were dead wrong. Jade kept her breathing steady as they pushed her into the back of the police car. The doors slammed shut, the sound echoing in her ears. She glanced at the two officers in the front seat. One was silent, gripping the wheel too tightly, his knuckles pale. The other, the one who had arrested her, smirked like he had already won. "You must think you're real slick, huh?" he said, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "Too bad you ran out of luck tonight." Jade didn't respond. She knew men like him, ones who thought their badge made them untouchable. The real question was why they were doing this. She had no criminal record, nothing even close. Whatever they were trying to pin on her, it had to be planned. Outside the car, the other officers were still talking to each other. Some looked uneasy. A few were watching her, their faces unreadable. Whoever had set this up hadn't told everyone on the force. That was a small advantage, but an advantage nonetheless. The engine rumbled to life, and the car pulled out of the gas station. The streets were quiet, only a few cars passing by. Jade's mind was already working through her options. She could escape right now if she wanted to, but that wouldn't help her figure out who was behind this. The officer in the passenger seat turned toward her. "You're gonna sit tight until we get to the station. Then we'll see how tough you really are." Jade met his eyes in the mirror, her expression blank. If they knew who she really was, they wouldn't be talking like that. "Hope you got a good lawyer," the officer added with a chuckle. "You're gonna need it." Jade looked out the window. The city lights blurred as they sped through the streets. She wasn't worried about a lawyer. She was worried about who had set her up, and why. Because if there was one thing she had learned in her years of service, it was this. When someone like her was framed, it wasn't random. It was a warning. The ride to the station was longer than it should have been. Jade noticed they weren't taking the main roads, instead weaving through back streets, where fewer cameras could track them. She remained still, keeping her breathing steady, but her senses were razor sharp. Something about this arrest felt off. The officers weren't following protocol, and that meant they had an agenda. The officer in the passenger seat was still watching her. "You haven't said much," he said, smirking. "Not gonna beg for mercy." Jade gave him a calm look. "Should I?" That made him pause for a second. He turned back around, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. He expected fear. He expected compliance. He wasn't going to get either. Meanwhile, back at the gas station, Officer Daniels stood near his patrol car, watching as the other officers wrapped up the scene. Something about this wasn't sitting right with him. He had been called in last minute for backup, but no one had given him a clear reason why this woman was being arrested. He knew a setup when he saw one. One of the higher-ups, Sergeant Miller, approached him. "We're done here," Miller said. His voice was clipped, like he was rushing to move things along. "You got a problem, Daniels?" Daniels hesitated. "Just seems like a lot of force for a simple arrest." Miller's jaw tightened. She was caught with illegal substances. Case closed. Daniels didn't buy it. The woman hadn't looked like someone who was panicking over an arrest. In fact, she had been too calm. And now that he thought about it, the arresting officers had barely let her speak. Something was being covered up, and Daniels had a feeling he wasn't supposed to ask questions. Back in the squad car, Jade could see the reflection of flashing lights from the dashboard. They were pulling into what looked like an abandoned lot, not the police station. That was all the confirmation she needed. This wasn't just an arrest. This was a setup. And whoever was behind it wanted her out of the way. The squad car came to an abrupt stop, its tires grinding against the gravel. Jade's pulse remained steady, but she could feel the shift in energy. The officers weren't trying to intimidate her anymore. They were preparing for something worse. The two men in the front exchanged a quick glance before stepping out, leaving her alone in the backseat with the doors locked. The silence was thick, almost calculated. Jade scanned the area. An abandoned lot, no streetlights, no cameras. This wasn't standard police procedure. They had gone through a lot of trouble to isolate her, which meant they were afraid of what she could do if she had the chance. They had no idea just how right they were. One officer opened her door, his grip rough as he yanked her out. "Let's take a walk," he muttered, shoving her forward. Jade's wrists were still cuffed, but she didn't resist. Not yet. She needed to know exactly what they were planning. Another officer pulled out his radio, but instead of calling dispatch, he pressed a different button. A few moments later, headlights appeared in the distance. Another vehicle was approaching. Jade listened carefully, picking up pieces of their hushed conversation. "She's not gonna talk," one of them muttered. "Too calm. We need to handle this before anyone asks questions." The realization hit her immediately. They weren't planning to take her to the station at all. They were planning to make sure she disappeared. Meanwhile, back at the gas station, Officer Daniels was growing more suspicious. He had tried calling in to confirm the charges against Jade, but the system showed no official report had been filed. That was impossible. If she had really been caught with illegal substances, there should have been a record. But there was nothing, just silence. That's when he knew. They were covering something up, and if he didn't act fast, something bad was about to happen. Back in the lot, the second vehicle finally pulled up, its tinted windows hiding whoever was inside. Jade felt the tension peak. This was it. Whatever was about to happen next would determine everything. And they still had no idea who they were really dealing with. The back door of the dark SUV swung open, and a man in a suit stepped out. He was different from the uniformed officers, clean-cut, calculated, and holding an air of authority that even the corrupt cops seemed to acknowledge. Jade didn't recognize his face, but she knew his type. He wasn't just some random enforcer. He was someone pulling the strings. One of the officers stiffened. "Sir, we got her just like you asked. No issues." The man took a slow, measured step toward Jade, looking her up and down as if assessing a piece of merchandise. "I expected more resistance," he said coolly. "She must not know what's really happening yet." Jade remained silent, her mind working fast. If this man was involved, it wasn't just about planting evidence or making her disappear. This was bigger, more organized. But why her? Why go through all this trouble for someone they thought was just an innocent woman? Then he smiled. "Do you even realize who you were supposed to meet today?" he asked, watching her carefully for a reaction. Jade didn't flinch, but inside, everything clicked into place. The meeting, the classified operation, the fact that she had been intercepted before she even arrived. This wasn't about her at all. They didn't know who she was. They only knew she had been heading towards something important. And that meant the real target was still out there. A phone rang, breaking the tension. The suited man answered, his expression darkening as he listened. "What do you mean she's not the contact?" A long pause. "Then who the hell did we just take?" Jade allowed herself the smallest smirk. The mistake they had just realized was the last one they would ever make. Because while they had spent all this time trying to frame her, they had just made the fatal error of underestimating exactly who they were dealing with. The officers exchanged nervous glances. The man in the suit's composure cracked for the first time. Jade straightened her stance, rolling her shoulders slightly despite the cuffs digging into her wrists. "Let me tell you exactly who you just messed with," she said, her voice low and controlled. The night wasn't over yet, but she was about to take control of it. The air grew thick with tension as the suited man stared at Jade, his grip tightening around his phone. He had just realized the grave mistake they had made, but it was already too late. Jade knew the moment of reckoning had arrived. These men thought they had trapped her, but in reality, they had locked themselves in with someone far more dangerous than they could imagine. Before anyone could react, Jade moved. With a sharp, practiced motion, she twisted her wrists, leveraging the slack in the cuffs to slide one hand free. The officer holding her barely had time to register what was happening before she spun, using his own body as a shield. In a flash, she disarmed him, his gun now firmly in her grasp. The other officers raised their weapons, but hesitation flickered in their eyes. They had expected a defenseless woman, not a highly trained operative who had spent years mastering close-quarters combat. Jade didn't hesitate. She aimed low, shooting out the tires of the SUV to block any escape route. The loud pops sent the officers scrambling for cover. The suited man's face paled. He reached for his own weapon, but Jade was faster. In a single fluid motion, she knocked the gun from his grip and pinned him against the side of the vehicle. "Who sent you?" she demanded, pressing the muzzle against his chest. His eyes darted around, looking for an ally, an escape, anything. "You don't understand," he stammered. "This isn't about you." Jade smirked. "Oh, I understand perfectly. You were never after me. You were after who I was meeting. But now you have a bigger problem." Suddenly, a series of red and blue lights flooded the scene. Backup had arrived, not for the corrupt officers, but for her. A convoy of unmarked black SUVs pulled up, and elite military operatives poured out. The suited man's face crumbled. One of the new arrivals, a commander Jade recognized, stepped forward. "We've been tracking them for months," he said. "Thanks for exposing them." Jade lowered the gun, stepping back as the corrupt officers were swiftly taken into custody. As she watched them being led away, she let out a slow breath. The man in the suit looked at her one last time. Who are you?" he whispered. Jade simply smiled. Just someone you should have never underestimated. As the last of the corrupt officers were loaded into the SUVs, Jade took a deep breath, letting the night air cool the fire that had burned in her veins. The weight of everything that had just happened settled over her, but she felt no fear, no uncertainty, only a deep sense of justice finally served. The commander walked up beside her, arms crossed as he watched the scene unfold. "You always had a way of getting yourself into trouble," he said with a smirk. Jade chuckled, shaking her head. "I didn't go looking for this one. It found me." He nodded, then grew serious. They were part of a much bigger operation. This takedown, it's just the beginning. There are more out there, people in power who think they can bend the law for their own gain. But thanks to you, we finally have enough to bring them down. Jade looked over at the suited man, now in handcuffs, staring at her with a mixture of fear and grudging respect. She had seen men like him before, arrogant, untouchable, believing they could manipulate the system. Tonight, he learned otherwise. As the agents secured the scene, Jade felt a buzz in her pocket. She pulled out her phone and saw a message from her commanding officer. Asterisk asterisk mission update. Stand down. You've done enough for now. Asterisk asterisk. A slow smile spread across her face. It wasn't often she got to wrap up unfinished business in such a personal way. She turned to the commander. "Looks like my job here is done." He gave her a knowing nod. For now, Jade took one last look at the chaos behind her. The flashing lights, the captured criminals, the sense of justice finally being restored. Then, without another word, she slipped into the shadows, disappearing as swiftly as she had come. By the time the dust settled and the news broke about the corrupt officer's arrest, there was no trace of the woman who had exposed them. Just whispers of a mysterious figure, one they would never forget.